Hello and welcome to today's video, which is about my favourite reads of all time. Today I'll be tackling number 30 to number 21. If you've not been on the channel before, I've been doing this kind of series of videos for a while. I started from my 80th favourite read to 71st, and each video I combated 10 books in each, but we're getting closer to number 1, near the end of this series now. You can check out the other videos if you want, but today, as I said, it'll be number 30 to number 21. So instead of listening to my voice, let's talk about some books. So in the number 30 spot, I have Fool's Assassin by Robin Hobb, one of my favourite authors of all time. A few other books have already popped up on these lists, and she has appeared yet again. This is book 1 of the Fitz and the Fool trilogy, book 14 of the overall Realm of the Elderlings trilogy. I know it's quite a ways in, but you should read them all. I committed sacrilege personally, and I skipped Live Ship Traders and Rainwild Chronicles because I wanted the cast of characters that are in the other 3 trilogies. So don't do that. As I said, it's sacrilege, and I have had many people hunt me down and tell me that was a big mistake. I'm rectifying it because I'm going to be beginning a reread very soon. But anyway, this is book 1 of the Fitz and the Fool trilogy. I can't say too much about the premise without getting into the dreaded spoilers category. Robin Hobb gave herself the very difficult task of taking the cast of characters from the Farseid trilogy and the Tawny Man trilogy and then giving them a new story and a new arc, despite them ending so satisfactory in a moving and engaging way at the end of the Tawny Man trilogy. But what an incredible job she did. This is absolutely fantastic. She finds a new layer to these characters, like ogres, and this encompasses them being older, having children, and there's that melancholic edge of like regret of what has happened in the past, what they would do differently, and you see how it really changes them later in life. Some have learned to thrive and they've embraced a new life, and others are really weighed down by the events of the past, and I think it's a really great balance that Robin Hobb finds there. And our main characters, as I said, I can't say too much about who's in it or the premise because it will spoil what happened earlier, but there are children of some main characters, and that really adds a different dynamic, which I thought was really interesting. And Fool's Assassin, just being back with these characters in this world, was just absolutely amazing. And Robin Hobb is so respectful to her previous series. She doesn't make any of that null or seem void, a bit like Philip Pullman. I loved his trilogy, his Dark Materials. But then I've read his 2 books since, which are with Lyra. I really enjoyed. I forgot what book 1 is called. It will pop up. And then the book 2, I believe, is called The Book of Dust. And I just felt like that was quite disrespectful to the original trilogy, in my opinion. But here, Robin Hobb really doesn't do that. It was absolutely brilliant. I loved being back with these characters, and it just felt like a continuation of this story, which I'm so engaged with and absolutely loved, and will be reading again soon. In the number 29 spot, I have The Outsiders by S.E. Hinton. This is a heartwarming and heartbreaking story, which is about the social divide between the younger generation in the US in the 1960s. So you have the socialists, who are kind of the richer boys at school, and then you've got the greasers, who are kind of from the poorer neighbourhood. And S.E. Hinton, this is partly autobiographical, that these are fictional characters, but some of the events are based off events that S.E. Hinton saw herself. So she was part of the social group, but she writes this from the perspective of the greasers, and it is absolutely brilliant. There's been a film with Patrick Swayze and Tom Cruise. It's a brilliant film and an adaptation which is so true to the book, where almost everything is the exact same and gives that same character depth, which I absolutely love the film, and I love the book as well. So yes, it's about that kind of conflict, but also it's about friendship, camaraderie, duty, and this whole balance of this group of friends who at times it seems like they don't like each other, but you see that they'll do anything for each other, and their motivations behind that are really interesting. And also at the heart of it, we have 3 brothers who live together and their parents have passed away. So the oldest brother, he really feels that duty to act like the parent, and that affects his relationships with his younger brothers. And then the middle brother, he's a bit of, he's funny, he likes to be the joke, but you see that he's quite deeply affected by what is going on as well. And then one of the main perspectives is the youngest brother, who feels out of place. He feels like he hasn't got a relationship with his older brother and those around him. As I said, he feels out of place, and this is about finding that identity and trying to exist in this world of social divide. And it's a really beautiful story, which is told absolutely fantastically. In the number 28 spot, I have The Rage of Dragons, a heart-wrenching, mind-blowing tale of love and loss, of hope and despair, and also its fair share of Vengeance. This is an African-inspired fantasy tale, which, as I said, is about vengeance, but it's got a really unique class system that I found really engaging to read about, and Evan Winter's got a great prose style, which creates this really fast-paced, efficient whirlwind of a read, as each chapter is kind of framed around an event. It's not necessarily action, but it's something that you really feel impacted by the reader, as the reader, and I felt really invested in. So that really pushes the plot forward. You feel like you're really taken up in this whirlwind of events, as our main character Tao does. It really reflects how he's feeling at the time. He's being thrown into an alien world which he's not used to, very different from life as he's grown up. But as I said, this is also a story of vengeance, and we are backing him in that way. But you also see it's kind of that question of, is vengeance worth it? It really overrides everything else that is important to him. He makes friendships, but what is he going to prioritize, that kind of vengeance or keeping friends alive and looking after them and really nourishing those friendships and nurturing them? But yeah, that's really interesting. It really invests us in the character of Tao. He makes big mistakes, but it's not really annoying or jarring. It's more just you really feel invested, and they feel believable and authentic, and the world is vivid, and you've got this intimate story, as I said, of that vengeance and of Tao as a character himself within a grander, more epic story, as we see these conflicting nations that border each other. War is escalating, and what is going to happen? And yet the title says there's dragons, so yeah, it's a classic fantasy story with them as well. So if you like dragons, this is definitely for you. If you like stories of vengeance, this is definitely for you. If you like a Bildungsroman, a coming-of-age story, this is for you. And if you like an action-packed, fast-paced story, guess what? This is for you. Anyway, yep, I have Neverwhere by Neil Gaiman. This is classic Gaiman with a quirkiness that just clicks with me. All his books really click with me, really, other than Stardust, which I just felt... There's some bits I didn't really... It went on a bit of a tangent. But anyway, we're talking about Neverwhere. I absolutely love the Graveyard Book, The Ocean at the End of the Lane. Good Omens I thought was really good as well. And Coraline, that film terrified me as a child. And the book was really good as well. But Neverwhere is my favourite by far. This is a great cast of characters, fantastic dialogue, and effortless, engaging prose. That's what Neil Gaiman really brings to the table. It's very accessible, but it's got a lot of depth as well, and I feel like this is one that everybody can really enjoy. And the higher up I get on my list, there are going to be more special editions, because I will invest in my favourite books. And so yeah, this is the Folio special edition, and it's a bit like Harry Potter in the sense of that there is a magical underbelly to the world as we know it. So we muggles, we normal people just walking about, not knowing about this kind of magical place which is very close to us. So in this, it's called London Below, which is a reflection of London, and it's really interesting, kind of taking that idea, and there's magical creatures, actual magic, and a lot more in this world. And we get a normal person just like any of us, and he stumbles across this somehow. I won't get into much more than that, because I absolutely love just finding this story as it comes along. And it's got two of the best villains of all time, Mr. Creep and Mr. Vandermeer. Hilarious, really brings the humour to the table, but also they're pretty intimidating and terrifying at the same time. And it's hard to bring characters that make you laugh but also terrify you at the same time. It's hard to find that in a villain, but Neil Gaiman really crafts a great balance. And as always, he loves to bring his quirkiness to the table and really subvert your expectations. So yeah, I thought he did a brilliant job with Neverwhere. It's my favourite book by Neil Gaiman. He's one of my favourite authors. And yeah, that is why Neverwhere is on the list in the number 27 spot. In the number 26 spot, I have The Silence of the Gales by Pat Barker. So I talked about The Women of Troy in a previous video, as that is one of my favourite books as well, but I preferred The Silence of the Gales, and this can also be read as a standalone. The premise is that this is a Trojan retelling, taking the story of the Iliad, but from the perspective of the women who usually fade into the background. So Briseis is our main perspective, and she is a Trojan noble and aristocrat, but she is taken as a slave, and a slave specifically of Achilles. So we really get that insight into the major players of the Trojan War, as she is a spectator really, and it's really interesting having a protagonist in that role. But anyway, yes, she is a slave in the Greek camp, and we see things unfold from that perspective. It's really quite brilliantly done that during the day she can hear the echoes of battle and kind of tell what is going on through that, but she can't see it, and it really brings kind of that adrenaline rush whenever you know what is going to happen, because I imagine most of us know most of the events of the Trojan retelling of the duel between Achilles and Hector and so forth. So when you hear it going on, you know what's about to happen, and you've got that kind of over processing, you know what's about to happen. It's really interesting just thinking, what will her reaction be, and how is she taking these events as they come by. I have done a review on the channel of The Silence of the Gales, and I absolutely love it. I think you should watch that if you watch that video if you think that this intrigues you and if you want to see if it is something you should pick up. And also, if you've already read it, in that video I also give a recommendation of what book I think you should read next if you've really enjoyed The Silence of the Girls. But yes, this is brutal, really brilliantly written, fantastic characters, and to take the Trojan retelling, which has been really weighed down with so many retellings now, it's hard to find something fresh, but Pat Barker somehow did that across every aspect of the story. Take it from a fresh direction with a brutal nature, with looking at it from the female perspective, the female characters in this story, and also just fresh characters overall. Achilles, you see him from different lens, his relationship with Patroclus, Menelaus, Agamemnon, really brilliantly done with this whole cast of characters. And I think Pat Barker is an absolutely exceptional author who I'd highly recommend. And yet, you guessed it, I'm going to say read Silence of the Girls. So we're halfway through the video now, maybe not in the time, but in the books that I have got through. And so my number 25th favourite book of all time is Sword in the Storm by David Gemmell, book 1 of the Regante Quartet. I believe it's quartet if it's 4 books. But yeah, this is quite an old copy. I have pillaged it from Papa Gwyn, as you do. You know what? If you're in a family and there's books everywhere, you borrow. It's part of the love, isn't it? But it has also been on my shelf for a year, so I've more than borrowed it. I think that qualifies as stealing. But yeah, hopefully you just watch this and find out. So yeah, that is Sword in the Storm. I absolutely love this. So the premise is that it's inspired by the historical conflict between the Romans and the Celtic tribes. So we've got the Regante, who are the Celtic tribes, and then we've got the Empire of Stone, which are inspired by the Roman Empire. And so Stone, they're expanding their borders, they're encompassing and assimilating tribes all around the continent, and they're getting to the Regante, and they're entering kind of the early stages of conflict. And Conovar is a boy in the Regante, not particular high status or low, and this is a Bildungsroman as we see him grow up. We really see this is a cornerstone in fantasy, as David Gemmell was quite integral to really taking those traditional fantasy aspects but adding grey, flawed characters who you're still rooting for. And he wasn't the only author to do that, but he was one who was so successful and really helped the genre of fantasy evolve, I believe, anyway. So Conovar is one of those characters. He makes so many mistakes. He has got heavy flaws, but as we see him grow from a child, we really see where some of those stem from, and you understand his motivations. And at the end of the day, you're still rooting for him, even though this is quite a tragic story in many ways. And this can really, even though it is a quartet, you can read this as a duology with a sequel, Midnight Falcon, I believe the sequel is called, which was on my list a little while back. And yeah, you can read just the first 2 because the latter 2 in the series jump 200 years in the future. So you can just read the first 2 and they really give it its own full story, and I'd highly recommend it. David Gemmell offers a stripped back prose which really makes us feel with the character. It really brings kind of that intimate feel, that there is no barrier of the writing, no purple prose for sure. You just feel like you're in the minds and accompanying the characters. And yeah, that is one of the strengths of David Gemmell, that you really feel this attachment and immersive experience. And yeah, Sword in the Storm, I think he does it the best here. And Conovar, just a brilliant character. Absolutely love him. And yeah, I need to reread this soon and maybe give Papa Gwyn his copy back. In the number 24 spot, I have Slaughterhouse-Five by Kurt Vonnegut. This is a satirical work of fiction that is both somehow hilarious and devastating. I mean, how does he do that? Have both at the same time? This is a tragic story that somehow, as I said, makes you laugh out loud all the time, but also really feel the emotional beats. And yeah, it brought tears to my eyes. It is very impactful, and yeah, I'll get into what this premise is about because that's where a lot of the themes play in, and as I said, those emotional moments occur. This is a story about a man called Billy Pilgrim who fights in World War II and is taken as a prisoner of war and is present during the bombing of Dresden, which, if you don't know, during World War II, the Allies bombed the city of Dresden, killing many innocents and turning most of the city into rubble, basically. And this is partly autobiographical because Kurt Vonnegut actually was fighting World War II and he was taken as a prisoner of war, and he did see the bombing of Dresden, and he saw it in a building called Slaughterhouse-Five. So yes, Billy Pilgrim is a fictional character, but many of the events he sees are straight from Kurt Vonnegut's own memory. And I believe when I did a bit of research into this, Kurt Vonnegut said he wrote this partly as a bit of closure, that he needed to talk about it, but also add that humour as a defence mechanism to really get past these events and try and cope with his trauma and the PTSD. So yeah, it's very interesting looking at it from that lens. This is a book that could be labelled as historical fiction or science fiction or absurdism, or as tragedy, or as a comedy. It's basically everything in one. It has no boundaries. You cannot fit it into everything. But yeah, there are science fiction elements such as time travel and aliens, but it could be historical fiction because those science aspects could be rationalised by thinking this is Billy Pilgrim, the main character's way of coping with his PTSD and his trauma. So to cope with what has happened, he creates these fantastical and scientific elements that come into play to help him cope with life after war. But yeah, it's brilliantly written. It really is quite poignant. Talks about the effects of war. And Kurt Vonnegut, I think he's a brilliant writer. I will say it again, it astounds me how he has so much humour, but also that tragic, melancholic edge to the story as well. I think I've never read anything like it that has that to this level before, and Kurt Vonnegut this is an absolute work of craft that is really engaging, really entertaining, but also tragic at the same time. It feels so weird to say a book is entertaining when it is a book about trauma, PTSD, the aftermath of war and bombings as well, but Kurt Vonnegut brings that aspect to it, and as I said, I believe that he did it as a bit of a defense mechanism. That's what his humour was, and he brings it to the story in this. Now on to number 23, a bit of a tone shift from Slaughterhouse-Five, and that is The Hobbit. I mean, how could I not have The Hobbit by J.R.R. Tolkien on my list of favourites of all time? This is the first book that I absolutely love. Papa Gwyn, it's just slipped on the arm there. Papa Gwyn read this to me when I was very, very young, and I just was hooked. He actually made up some lines which were my favourite of the entire book, and then when I read it myself, I was searching for them and couldn't find them. So, yeah, he won up J.R. Tolkien in some ways. But yeah, anyway, The Hobbit is really brilliant. It brings those classic fantasy adventure feel with wizards, dragons, as I said, adventure and more. And of course, it's got hobbits. How can it get better than that? But also, as well as all those fun adventure tropes and aspects to it that J.R. Tolkien writes in such an accessible and entertaining way, this is also a story about friendship, and I really love how that is at the core of all of Tolkien's stories, where, especially in the Silmarillion, there is a lot of tragedy, but throughout all his stories, friendship and duty and caring for others is really at the heart of what he does and what he is writing about, and I think that really adds so much depth to this story, which could just be a regurgitation of the classic fantasy adventure we've seen many times, but adding that friendship to it, and also the unique characters of Bilbo Baggins as a hobbit and the dwarf companions he has, and Gandalf, it just brilliantly all comes together in such a vibrant, living, breathing world that I don't think any fantasy author has managed to recreate to this level of depth. George R. R. Martin is close, but I still believe Tolkien really brings that living, breathing feeling even more. I mean, he made up his own languages and they're present here. Some people, I think, get a bit annoyed or a bit bored of a lot of the songs that are in The Hobbit, Lord of the Rings and The Silmarillion. But for me, they didn't really impact me. I really enjoyed them. They add another lens to the world. And also, I am a stats man. I'm obsessed with stats, and as well as stats, history. So these songs often contain parts of the histories, and I absolutely love it. Any detail I can get, I will snatch up, especially when it's in the world of Middle-earth and it's by J.R. Tolkien. So getting to my penultimate book, sorry if I've been yapping on for too long now, but yeah, I've loved talking about these books, but I don't want to bore you. So on to my penultimate book, my 22nd favourite of all time, and that is The Last Argument of Kings by Joe Abercrombie. This is his finale to the First Law trilogy, his original trilogy that he did, that you could read just on its own, but there are also some standalones in another trilogy afterwards that take place. But a bit like I said with Silence of the Gales, you can just read the first ones and really enjoy them and have a full, complete story on their own. And in this, Joe Abercrombie brings his humour, his cynical characters, the gritty world, and the subverted tropes, but then he also offers a really satisfying conclusion in this culmination of events, which is both epic but also takes you by surprise at every corner. Joe Abercrombie is a brilliant writer of character, in particular that kind of the contrast between the internal monologues and the actions of characters is just really brilliant. It shows that people cannot be honest in this world if they want to survive, especially in the case of Glocta, who is just, his inner monologue is just so brilliant. One of the greatest things in any book I've ever read, but then what he says is always just completely different, and it shows he's very clever, very intelligent, but he's also quite devious, and he needs to do that to survive and get his own way. But yes, this also has one of the best duels of all time. Whilst it's quite different from other fantasy books in how it subverts so many tropes, it also has that kind of core that many fantasy readers absolutely love, and it has, as I said, one of the best duels of all time. It has some of the best characters of all time, and this culmination of events. We have epic scenes, epic battles, epic conflict, but we also have some twists and turns and surprises along the way, which at the end of this book, my dad said that he finished it and then he thought, if I wanted something that real, I could have turned the news on. So yeah, it is quite a dark ending, but also we all in this household absolutely love it. And Last Opening of Kings is a brilliant story. I do prefer some of the others in the trilogy, which says how highly I rate this trilogy. So you may see them on one of my future lists. But yeah, Last Opening of Kings, 22nd favourite book of all time, and probably my top 5 series of all time. So yeah, I highly recommend it, and I've got the Broken Binding special edition right here. Love those edges, and they're brilliant when they're all next to each other as well. But yeah, Joe Abercrombie, he is named Lord Grimdark for a reason, and I'd highly recommend this. And this is one of those that I think is really one that people who don't read fantasy normally should also try out, because I understand with a lot of fantasy books I probably wouldn't recommend them to, say, someone who just reads historical fiction or just reads crime, but this is one that I think people of any genre could really enjoy. So yeah, that is Last Argument of Kings by Joe Abercrombie. So on to my 21st favourite read of all time, and the last book I'll be talking about this video, and it is Royal Assassin by Robin Hobb, the second book of her original Farseer trilogy. So this time you don't have to read 14 books before getting to it, you just have to read Assassin's Apprentice, which is book 1 of her original trilogy. So yes, this is Royal Assassin, and you know what, after reading her first book I thought, you know what, I think she might go a bit easier on her characters. How wrong could I be? I'll be honest, it took me a little while to forgive Robin Hobb for what she did to some of my favourite characters of all time in this book, but overall, long term, I've come to accept it. The emotional trauma was worth it. I don't know what that says about me that I love this book, that just really made me cry so much. But yeah, it's on this list, and I'll let you draw your own conclusions about that. But yeah, I'm a character driven reader, as I've probably said 1,000 times on this channel already, and you're probably bored of me saying if you've watched a few videos. But yeah, I'm a character driven reader, and Robin Hobb ticks that box. She more than ticks that box. This is the essence of a character-driven story. This is the epitome of that. And yeah, the characters are at the heart of it. There's a great plot progression as well, but the characters are at the forefront. They are at the core. They are what supplies the heart to the story, and this is what the story's about. It's about Fitz growing up. It's a Bildungsroman about him, how he's exploited by those around him, how he's still moulding to this new life. He feels out of place, but how those he really loves, he feels really attached to, and you really see that as a child as he's growing up, how he places so much importance on them, but then also those who he hates as well. And you really see kind of those childish aspects. It's hard to write a character as a child who you want as the main character to have agency in your story, but Robin Hobb did an absolutely exceptional job, and we see Fitz growing up more since Assassin's Apprentice, and I love that evolution of character as well, where, as I said earlier, Robin Hobb captures the full scope of humanity and what it means to be human. We feel joy, we feel sadness, we feel anger, we feel all of those emotions, and Fitz goes through them all, and they're shown brilliantly. And this ending, wow, if this was a video about best endings of all time, this would be in the top 5, and it's mind-blowing. And yeah, that's what I found so hard to forgive Robin Hobb for. But yeah, second installment of one of my favourite series of all time. Robin Hobb, as I say a lot, is one of the great prose writers in my opinion. The way that she manipulates language to get across exactly what it seems like she wants is just absolutely masterful, and I just think she's an incredible writer, and this is an incredible story. I thought book 3, the ending was a little bit disappointing, but the characters are so brilliant, and the first 2 books are absolutely amazing, so it's really worth reading them. And then every book after that I've read was just exceptional as well. So yeah, I highly recommend Royal Assassin, and I actually beg you, please read this series. And yeah, this is another special edition that yeah, it's one of my favourite books of all time, so of course I had to get this when I saw it pop up. Some lovely art in there. But yeah, that is Royal Assassin, and the last book I'll be talking about in this video. So there we go, they are my favourite books of all time, from number 30 to number 21. Hopefully you enjoyed these books that I talked about. Have you read any of them? Have I intrigued you in reading them? You can check out the reviews of some of those that I talked about there on Goodreads, or I did a review on the channel of The Science of the Gales that you can check out. Let me know if you want me to do a separate video dedicated to just reviewing one or two of these books in the comments below. Let me know if you've read them, as I said, and let me know if you've got any reads that sound a bit similar that I may love. I always love book recommendations, and I'm really thankful when anyone drops them in the comments below. But everyone, thank you so much for watching and sticking with me to this video to the end. So yes, as I said, thanks so much for watching. Stay safe.